Hi, before we go on to our next lesson, we're going to do a recap of lesson 1.3b, which was distance and midpoint in 2D. You've learned the distance formula, which was d equals square root of x2 minus x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And if you are dealing with graphs, where you do the rise over run, then that's when the Pythagorean theorem will come into play, which is c equals square root of a squared plus b squared. You also learned midpoint when you have your midpoint with two coordinate points, and it gives you m equals x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. So basically it's almost like you're taking the average of the x's and the average of the y's divided by 2 of those 2 points and divided by 2 for midpoint. So we're just going to do a few examples based on those two formulas. They said that find the coordinates of the midpoint for AB, where A is negative 2, 3, and then B is 6 and 4. So let me get a pen. So we're looking for the midpoint. So we know midpoint, we got x1 plus x2 of that, and make sure it's in its parentheses, and then y1 plus y2 over 2. And of course label, because if you label, then you know where to put the numbers according to what the corresponding variables. So for this one, see if I can try to squeeze this here. So x1, you got negative 2 plus 6 over 2. And then for y, we got 3 plus negative 4 over 2. And then I need to simplify. This will give me 4 over 2. And this will give me negative 1 over 2. So it will be, my midpoint will be 2 over, I'll just put negative 0.5, or you could put negative half. Either way, it's the same. Now, the distance of AB. So you already have everything labeled. You know the distance formula. I'm going to write it there. So we got x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Plug in everything in the right spot. You already have everything labeled, so just pay attention to where you put everything. So that's negative 2. So if there's a negative number behind a negative, that's going to be behind a minus sign, make sure you put in parentheses, because then you're going to get a totally different number if you have 6 minus 2 and completely forgetting about that negative. And don't forget your squares, all that stuff. And this one is minus 3. And when you're simplifying, bring down the radical symbol. Do not just all of a sudden it disappears like poof, like magic. Bring it down, because you will need to, once you get to a more simplified number, then you need to simplify the number underneath the radical. So this one will give you 8 squared, and then this one will give you negative 7 squared. I'm just going to continue over here. Again, you're bringing down the radical sign because we didn't do anything with it yet. 64, and this is 49. And then when you continue, 64 and 49 will give you 113. And since I think 113 is a prime number, so let's see if, unless I ask you to give me a certain number, you could leave it as that, as a distance, or let's put it into a number. So it'd be if it's 10.63, I'll just put 10.6. So that's the distance, an approximation based on this. Alright, so now let's move on. Our next lesson is circles in the coordinate plane. And the objective is, how do we write the equation of a circle and graph circles on the coordinate plane? So before we even get to that, we need to know certain terminologies and parts So when writing equations of circles, we need to know what the equation of a circle is. This is the equation of a circle. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. The x and the y, the one that I put in purple, represents any point that is on the circle. So I'm going to show you the circle. Let's see if I can get this bigger. Okay. So it's any point on the circle. So you got the circle, you got these 2 points. The h and the k, which is in red, represents the center of the circle. And the r is the radius. So that's the radius, represents from the circle, center of the circle, to any point that is on the circle. That will form the radius. So those are the part. This is where the equation comes from. So basically, you're involved in the point that's on the circle, the radius, and the center. Now, if you were to look at this to understand why is this, where does this come from, think about when we have to find the distance from 2 points. Notice that we have our x values that we subtracted and then squared, and then we have our y values that we subtracted and then we squared, and it's underneath the square root, and that gives us the distance. This is where that formula comes from, but we're doing it in circle. So that's why when we did that recap, that distance formula, again, it's nothing new. It's now we're just doing it in circles, with circles. But we're doing it with different variables. It looks different because of different variables, but it's the same format. And with this equation, it's the standard form. Every time you see that, you're like, okay, that's the standard form of a circle. All right, so let me that and move on. Okay, make sure I didn't skip anything. All right, so we're going to write an equation for each circle with the given information. So we have a center, which is negative 2, 4. Then next center can also be written as hk, and they gave us the diameter, which is 4. In order to find the radius, you do half of the diameter, which gives us 2. So we have those 2, and now we can use that into the formula. So let me see if I can do this. Actually, you know what? I'll just do it this way. So we have our formula. Remember, using this one, we have our formula written there, and we plug in our information. We know our h is negative 2. So remember, like I said, if there's a negative number that's going to be right after a minus sign, put that negative number in the parentheses. So that way you know that you're going to have to do distribution, or else you're going to get a total different answer. And then the 4 was just positive, you just plug it in, and then the radius, which we found was 2, you plugged it in. Once we do that, we simplify, we leave it like this. We leave it as is. The only thing that we're actually simplify, if no distributive property happening here, we simplify the radius. So whatever number squared will give us that, and that's our equation of the circle for that given point, given circle, given center, and the radius. That's how we do that. For next one, same thing. They gave us the center, which is hk. They gave us the diameter. We need to do half. That gives us 6. And then when we do the work, gotta move this to the side. So we have again our formula. We plug in. Our h was 3, and our k was 3, and then our r was 6. We square it, and then we come up with our circle equation. Nothing to it. This one, the origin. What is origin? Origins mean the center of when the x and the y axis intersect. That's 0, 0, and our radius is 3. So we already have the radius. Origin 0, 0. It's hk. So for number 3, we use the formula, and our h and the k was 0. So a number minus 0 is just going to be the number itself. So that's why it's x squared, and then we have y squared, and then our r was 3, if you remember, and then we just square it, and it gives us a 9. So that's the circle equation. And the last one, our radius is 8, so we don't have to do anything different. Our center is -12, -1, or h, k. And in order to remember which goes first, think of your alphabet. Which comes first? If you go from A, starting from A, which comes first? The H, then the K afterwards. So that way you know the H represents the X position and the K is for the Y position. So when you plug it in, make sure you got a negative number coming right after a minus, put in parentheses. Don't forget the squares. And then don't forget to distribute if you have two negatives next to each other. And then simplify the radius. And then you get your thing. There's nothing else you need to do. It has to be in that standard form. If you don't have it in that standard form, then you don't really have the answer. Make sure there's nothing you need to you don't need to multiply this twice or whatever. That's the form that I'm looking for when we're dealing with circles. Alright, so let me expand that to show you the whole thing. Okay. So now we just have more examples. So it says the center is at 2, 2. And the endpoint of a radius is 7, 14. So we need to find the standard form, the equation that's going to represent this. So in standard form, the circle of the equation, equation of a circle. So in order to do that, we need to figure out what is our center, 2, 2, and then our endpoint. Now, if you were to visualize it, you have a circle, and then you have an endpoint. That endpoint is on that circle. Endpoint of that radius. So you have the center, and the radius is going to that endpoint that's sitting on the circle. Do we know the radius? No, they didn't give us the radius, so we have to find the radius. And we need to find the radius based on that circle equation. We could do that, and that's where, if I can move this out, this is where we need to use the distance formula. But the distance, this is the distance from the center to the radius. So the radius distance is this. It looks like what we did for the circle equation, or the equation of a circle, but we need to find the distance of the radius. And in order to find any distance, we're using this formula. So that's why I have x1, y1, x2, y2, because I'm finding the center to the end. These are the 2 points, and I just plug it in. So with this one, if I can, it's going to be tiny, so bear with me. So we plugged it in, make sure we have the correct number with the correct variable. Simplify, make sure you bring down the radical. And then you get to its clean form, which is 13. So that's the radius. The radius is going to be 13. And the center, which they gave us, is 2, 2, which is HK. Now this is confusing because I put x1 and y1. This was because I was trying to find the distance, the radius, distance of the radius. Now, once you find the radius, then you replace this with this because you're trying to write out this equation of a circle based on these two information that's needed. So once you do that, you plug it back into the plug it into the equation of a circle. You have your h and your k, and then you have your radius, and then you just simplify, and then you have that. This might be a bit confusing. Just take it slow. And again, if you have any questions, you can always email me and I can provide examples and slow it down for you, break it down so that way you can understand it better. This is the same example, different numbers. They gave you a center, they gave you an endpoint. You need to find the radius because if they want you to create an equation of a circle, you need the radius as well as the center of that circle. So I put in all of my information, and I put a label of these because I know I'm going to be using this formula to find my radius. So once I do that, everything is, I got to push everything off to the side. So once I do that, then I plug in the information that I labeled, and then I found my radius to be 10, and my center is -2, 3, which is my HK. So with those two, I plug it into the formula. So let me make that bigger. I plug it into that, plug it into the formula. Remember, there's a negative number, put in parentheses because you know you're going to distribute, and then simplify, and then there's your answer, your equation for that circle based on the endpoint, the radius you found, and the center of the circle. So like I said, if it's confusing, you can always pause, go back, go through the steps, and you can also email me. Alright, let's do another one. We got a diameter with the endpoints of 5, 0 and -5, 0. Alright, there's a diameter. We need to have a radius. And they gave us the endpoint. You could use the distance formula to find the distance and then split it in two. But you know what? Since they gave us the point, I'm going to, there's no graph, but I created my own little graph. I plotted on the graph that I created. So I noticed that the 5, 0 and -5, 0 are going to be on the same line. So I just plotted it, and I noticed that the distance from that point to the other point is 10. So since that's this represents the diameter, and I want the radius, I'm going to just split it in half. So half of that is, of course, is 5. And where's the center? The center is right here, which is going to be 0, 0. So that's how I did that. So I found my center, which is HK, and then I know my radius is 5, half of 10. So with those two information, I can plug it into the formula, the circle equation, and then I got my circle equation with these points that they gave me. Next one, it's a diameter. That's why you need to pay attention. Because if they don't give you the radius and you're dealing with their circle equation, you need to have that radius and a center. Here you don't have a center, you don't have a radius, but they gave you the diameter. And you know, in the circle, the diameter can be, when you cut it in half, gives you the radius. And then that's where you can find the center. So for this one, I just plotted on a little graph. And notice that it's that the distance is 8. From this point to this point is 8. I know half of 8 is 4. So I know that my radius is going to be 4. But then where is that center of that line? So again, you know it's 4. The radius is 4. So you need to count 4 from that point. So if you did 1, 2, 3, 4, it puts you at 2, 2. So I found my center as 2, 2 for that line, which is my HK. My radius I said was 4 because it's half of 8, which is the diameter of this circle. I know it's no circle, but it gave you the diameter of it. Now once I do that, I have my two things that I need. Then I use my formula, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Plug in information. I have my k and h are same, they're 2. And then my r is 4. I squared that, I got 16. And then I just left this as is. And there's my answer that's the equation of the circle with these two endpoints. So that means that circle represents That circle has these 2 points that are sitting on it. Okay. So now we're going to draw circles based on the information they gave us. So we have our circle formula. We need to find out what is our center. So what I'm going to do is I have the equation of a circle. I wrote it there just so that way you can see where this is coming from. And notice that in order to find the center, I know most of you right away will just take, it's HK. So you look at where the position is, and you're going to just pull it out and put 2 and 3, or 2, -3. You got to be careful. The number is what we need to deal with. We're not worrying about the sign. But since we have to work off of the standard form of this equation, that means that H, whatever that H is, has to be, how can I say it? Whatever the H is, it has to be behind the negative sign. It has to be behind the minus sign. Notice that there's no minus sign. So that's why you can see here where I turned it to a minus, because I'm trying to stick to the standard form. And in order to get to that positive, I would have to multiply 2 negatives to get a positive. So this form is the same as this form. It's just this is simplified based off of this. So that means my H is going to be -2. And this one, nothing, it stayed in its standard form. There's a minus in front of it, so we just take the 3. So my center is -2, 3, my HK. My radius, you do the square root of this. Wherever you have like a full number, do the square root, see if it gives you a perfect square. In this case, it's 4, so my radius is 4. So since I have those two information, I can make my graph of the circle. So -2, 3 is my center, and then my radius is 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, so that's going to be 1 point. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, you're trying to make a circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the radius, you need to have your points. 1, 2, 3, 4 to make that circle. Well, since I have this, I'm going to hopefully, yeah, there we go. Extend it a little bit more. There you go. There's our circle. And I'll put the radius. My radius is 4. So that means all around it's 4. There you go. So remember, write the standard form first. In order to pull out the center, the best way for me to tell you in order to do that so you don't get confused, if you cannot remember what to do, whatever number is behind the sign, do the opposite of it. So notice it's positive, make it a negative. If this is behind the negative, the minus, it's a positive. So that's another way you can remember it. So when you have this form, positive, just do the opposite to get your center. So your K and your H and your K. And this one you do the square root. Alright, let's do another example. Another example, we have x squared plus y squared equals 9. If you do the square root of 9, our radius will be 3. For the center, you remember when we had a problem like this, and in order to get to x squared, y squared, what's our x? How did we get to that? Both k and h and k were 0. So our center is 0, 0. Anytime you see this formula, like you see an equation like this, 1, you know it's going to be a circle equation, and 2, you know that if our center is going to be 0, 0. So we start at 0, 0. And our radius is 3, so we got 3 here, 3 here, 3, and then 3. And then we draw a circle. I mean, you're not going to have this, oops, where is the shape? You're not going to have this, but if you draw the circle, make sure you have all the radius points, and then you could draw the circle. You could just try to figure it out. But if you have a software that can give you the circle, if you do it online or something, then that's great. But it doesn't have to be super perfect, but make sure that you show where the radius is, so that way you're not going to give me an oval or an ellipse, some kind of weird shape. Right. Next one. So let me see. Yeah. Next one. Our radius, you see 4, do the square root of 4. It gives you 2. I'm just going to put the equation here. And again, you notice that this is a positive, so that means it has to turn into a negative because we need to stick to the standard form. But the little tip that I gave you, look at the number, look at the sign in front of the number, do the opposite. So this would be positive, and then the 3 would be negative. So then we have our center. So 2, negative 3 is our center, and our radius is 2. So we got 2, 2, 2, and 2, and I just do the circle. There we go. Same thing with this. We got 16, square root of 16 is 4. Now, we know, remember I gave you the tip that if this, whatever the sign is in front, it's going to be the opposite, so it's 3. But there's nothing here. Doesn't mean there's nothing. Because how did we get to y squared? It was supposed to be y minus k, so that means our k was 0. So that means we have 3, 0 as our center. And I'll just put, so you see, you notice that k was our 0, so that's how we got to y squared, because y minus 0 is just y, and y squared is just y squared. So we put in our center, which is 3, 3, 0, and then 4 is our radius. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we put our circle. Trying to make it as good as it gets. Alright. So we're just going to go do some little practice so that way you are familiar with it. You get select. So it says write an equation for each circle. So it says the center is at the origin, means 0, 0. And that means it's our HK. And the radius is 6. So again, you use that formula. And then you plug in the information that is given. 0, 0, HK, and then our R is 6. We simplify, and then we got x squared plus y squared equals 36. Go to center, 4, 3. Radius is 9. That means this is HK. 4 is H, 3 is K. We just plug it in. Then we simplify. This is going to stay the same. There's nothing to simplify, and then we just simplify the radius. Gives us 81. They give us the center, negative 5 and 2. That's our HK. Our radius is 4. So we have our radius, our circle equation. And notice that our H is negative. If you're going to plug it in, plug a negative number behind a minus sign, put in parentheses, please. Just like I did here. That's where you're going to simplify. You do the distributive property. You're going to simplify this. And you're going to get positive 5 in this area. And then you get 16. Now, They gave you a center, and they gave you a diameter. So the diameter, you do half, you get 12 for your radius, and your center, HK. Same thing, you use the formula, the equation I should say, plug in the information, simplify, and there's your equation. So let me see if I can make this bigger. Because you need practice to get the hang of this. Alright, so we're not going to do this one. So I'm going to go back as a recap because we've reached the end of this lesson. So basically we're dealing with writing equations of a circle. This is the equation of a circle. That's the standard form. We have x, y is any point on the circle. The HK is the center of the circle, and the R represents the radius of the circle. This R, this equation, is equivalent to the distance formula that we learned, because we're trying to find the distance of the radius based on the 2 points, the center and the end point that they gave us. So that's where this is coming from. That's why it's like that. And with the center, you know, the center is HK. Think of the alphabet. H comes before K. So it's like X, Y. Same thing. If they gave you let's try that again. If they gave you the diameter, wow, I'm having a rough time with this. You do the half of it and to get the radius. And you just plug it in. If you have a negative number, like your center is a negative number, make sure you put it in parentheses behind the minus sign, because you need to distribute. And then simplify. Don't forget to simplify the radius. Don't just give me, for example, like 2 squared. What's 2 squared? Just finish off, you know, it's 4. Don't leave it like that, because that means you're not done. And when it deals with having 2 points, the end point and the center, you need to find the radius. In order to find the radius, you use the distance formula. Once you find that radius, then you have the center already and the radius, and plug it into the circle equation to find your equation for those points. And let's see, anything else. And with when it comes to graphing your circle, they give you the equation. Determine what your H and your K, it's always the numbers. And in order to determine the center, whatever sign is in front of that number, do the opposite of it to give you the center. And in the radius, you have to do the square root, because this doesn't represent the radius. It is the radius, but it's squared. But you have to work backwards and find what it was originally before it was squared. Be careful, because I've seen where someone gives me 16 as the radius, and it's like, no. So be careful. You have to do the square root, whatever they give you, because this is simplified. So you need to work backwards. All right. So we've reached the end. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Don't just wait for the last minute. All right. So have a good day.